What honks but isn't a goose, screams but isn't a petulant child, and has 23 keys but doesn't open a single door? According to the outline, saxophone fatigue is in part the result of a decades-long reversal that took the instrument from the hook of practically every American hit to a punchline and a joke about men who think they're sexy. But the saxophone isn't alone. Throughout the evolution of pop music, big band instruments, including the violin and the flute, have had resurgences across decades. Even the lowly cowbell has had its moments. But none have suffered a crueler fate at the hands of pop culture than that of the lowly saxophone, which saw its image drop from a symbol of sex to greasy jokes that represented everything wrong with the 1980s. In the 1985 Brat Pack release, St. Elmo's Fire, released a year after George Michael's iconic Careless Whisper, a young Rob Lowe plays struggling graduate Billy alongside a who's who of coming-of-age 80s cinema, who aspires for the glitz and glam that playing his saxophone had brought him before the weight of the world and adult responsibilities forced him to grow up. But for those screaming, intense moments, he and his sax are gods. But even the strongest stone can crumble under the weight of repetition, saturation, and a discerning public yearning for the sound of something new. Musically, the saxophone occupies much of the same sonic space as the human voice, and the solo allowed the instrument prime time to shine. Except as music technology evolved, and the pop stars of the day redefined what it meant to be the next big thing. Billy Joel's croons about wanting you just the way you are, and David Gilmour's ethereal compositions within Pink Floyd found themselves pushed aside by the likes of Michael Jackson, who took pop music and the definition of what it means to be a pop star to heights never before imagined. Electronic beats, sampled instruments, and no room for a big brassy horn. Whereas once Rob Lowe's Billy was the talk of the DC music scene, he soon became a laughingstock as the reins of pop culture turned away from the saxophone with its biggest drop since the Second World War. Over the past 40 years, it's gone from pace setter to gimmick, and all but disappeared from modern popular music, with the exception of a few gleaming moments. But that's not because people hate it. It's because the way we hear music is changing almost as quickly as the way we make it. While the saxophone has been on the decline since the 1960s, it never faced the type of challenge against public perception it experienced going into the 90s. Ironically, aside from dropping the saxophone from a lead instrument to a mindless honk in the rhythm section, it was a world-renowned saxophonist who simultaneously brought the instrument back to the top 10 chart, but also tarnished perception of the instrument to something only enjoyed by middle-aged losers and smooth jazz poseurs. I'm talking, of course, about Kenny G. To his own credit, Kenny G achieved almost unbelievable popularity with his 1986 album Duotones hitting number 6 on the Billboard charts, despite criticism of him by those that didn't appreciate his pop style as being distinct from traditional jazz saxophone playing. But as popular music shifted focus from bands to individuals, the saxophone was soon out of its element as samples began to overtake the landscape, something that has only gotten worse as time's gone by. But there was occasionally an exception to the loss of sax on the musical landscape. Musical virtuoso Prince was a big fan of the instrument and used it to great acclaim on such tracks as Girls and Boys. But, much to the dismay of saxophone lovers, the indelicate saxophone riffs of 80s pop became the instrument's primary associations, and the instrument soon fell out of fashion. By 1990, the heyday of the saxophone in popular music was past, but it remained a cultural artifact. Playing the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show during the 1992 election season is credited with giving Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton a big boost in key demographics, particularly amongst African Americans and young voters, which is credited with rocketing him ahead of President George Bush in the polls, and ultimately landing him in the White House. And now, we're here. The 90s. Look around. No one is having sax anymore. Grunge rock is the radio darling, and the horn section that dominated popular music for decades is no more. Or is it? Thank you very much for listening. Next time on Sax in the 90s, we take a look at the sonic wasteland that was the early 90s for drops of saxy sustenance amidst a landscape that has all but turned sampled and synthetic. I'm your host, Sir Charles Brattleboro. Good night. Sax in the 90s is an ever podcasts are found. STS is 100% independent, with no ads or corporate sponsors cluttering up the content, thanks to the kind generosity of our supporters. And you can help keep it that way with a donation on PayPal or by joining the Stories Telling Stories Patreon for $1 a month or more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and share this episode with your family and friends so we can continue to grow the series through Season 5 and beyond. And until next time, stay saxy. Perhaps that should be stay horny. No, saxy.